How's it going, Dragons? This is JP, the legendary Dragon Duelist, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a Salamangreat deck profile. Yes, I know, back-to-back deck profiles. This is a pretty budget deck, and I also do feel like it is fairly good and pretty powerful for being this cheap. It's not exactly tier 1 best deck anymore, but it can go up against the top meta decks and do pretty well against them. And if you do enjoy this deck profile, make sure you do subscribe, like, all that stuff. I'll remind you again at the end of this video. First, for the Salamangreat package, there's the one Salamangreat Gazelle. It's limited, maybe it could come up to 2 on the next ban list, maybe soon after that. It's a Foolish Burial or Foolish Burial Goods for Salamangreat cards. It just sends any Salamangreat card to the graveyard. Most of the time you're sending one of your Salamangreat traps, probably Roar because it negates unless you already have it in your hand. And then when you're going second, you send probably like a Spinny Jaguar also. Just do whatever would be best in the current situation. Next up, we have 2 Spinnies. This card is just a free extender for Salamangreats. You do need a Salamangreat card in order to discard this card from the hand. Sometimes you could send it to the graveyard with Gazelle if you're doing your 1-card OTK with Debug. Next up, there's 2 Foxy, double Foxy. So, this card adds a Salamangreat card from your deck to your hand. If you do have trouble getting Salamangreat traps, which most of the time you don't, it could help a ton with that. You could also get extenders like Will the Salamangreat and Salamangreat Circle if you need a Search Gazelle. Just whatever you excavate. Most of the time you do excavate something unless you're me. But since we have a lot of Salamangreat cards, there's a higher chance of excavating a Salamangreat card than not excavating it. Next up, 2 Salamangreat Jaguars. This is for making your rank 4 such as Abyss Dweller and number 41. And also it is a great recycler for Salamangreat Sunlight Wolf because when you are in the grind game, it is very useful to recycle as many extra deck pieces as you can. Over time, you'll just end up outgrinding your opponent with that. Next, we have 1 Foul. This one's chain blocking, special summons from the hand. Let's say you summon Bailings, trigger its effect, chain Foul. Now your opponent can't ash your Bailings. If they do though, it's not completely terrible because if you just have one more extender, you could still Reincarnation Link summon into your Sunlight Wolf. Make sure you also know all the effects on your cards because Foul does also have an effect that disables back row from your opponent. Next is Falco. This one just bounces to the hand, makes it easier to recycle maybe Gazelle if you want to. Also again, it's level 4, good for making rank 4 monsters. But there's not too much more to say about that one, so let's just go into more of our cyber support. Which first we have a bunch of Flame Buffaloes. This one is a good one. I prefer this over Lady Debug because pretty much every single hand trap hits Lady Debug in some way. Also, Lady Debug can't get you to your full combo anyways without being a little awkward to play with. It could be hard to use hand traps against Flame Buffalo, and also it gives you more advantage in the hand while also chain blocking. Next, I do have just 1 Lady Debug because it could come up where you need this card. But if you don't want to play it because you're worried about hand traps, just maybe play an Upstart Goblin instead or find some room to fit something else. Next up, we have 3 Parallel Exceed. This one is of course extender and also a free rank 4 monster. So when you see this card in your hand, not only could you chain block, there's a lot of chain blocking in this deck, you also get a free rank 4 monster, and rank 4 monsters in this deck are pretty good disruption against the meta. Next up, let's get into our hand traps. We play 3 Ash Blossom. This one is a really great trap for Salamangreats because it's a fire attribute, which means you can recycle it with your Sunlight Wolf. Boom, flashy Sunlight Wolf. Not only is it recyclable, but it's pretty much always a great hand trap in every single format, and even though it's been printed 30 times, it's still about $10. Next up, for a more format specific hand trap, there's 3 Ghost Spells. This one is really good because there's a lot of banishing, recursion from the graveyard stuff that this card hits, and it's just pretty powerful and strong against some of the top decks like Virtual World, Drytron. You can Ghost Spell a Gamma, by the way, because Gamma brings Driver from the graveyard if it's there, and because it has that effect, you can always Ghost Spell it. Next, there's triple DD Crow. Another good hand trap this format. If you watch the Thunder Dragon deck profile video, I explained how if you chain this to the tributes of Ben 10, with the Drytron monsters by the way. So if your opponent uses a Drytron monster and tributes Ben 10, you banish it with DD Crow, and now not only will they not resolve Ben 10, they'll probably have lots of difficulty getting another Ben 10 to their hand unless they have multiple or another search. That's it for the hand trap lineup. Now I'm going to show you some spell cards. Of course, there's the one of Salamangreat Sanctuary. I hate to draw this card, but luckily it's a one-of, which means that the chance of drawing it is slow. And this is of course used to help you get to your full combo without needing another extender. But if by any chance you don't happen to get this card, just use another extender and make your Sunlight Wolf with 2 monsters instead, including your Sunlight Wolf, which seems kind of minusy. I don't like to do that, but it's necessary if you don't have this card. Next, you remember how I said that it's a one-of in a 40 card deck, which means it's harder to draw? Well, sadly, the same thing applies to Circle because it's limited, of course. Mainly you're going to use its search effect, but I guess maybe its protection effect can come up. Of course, this is just more consistency to keep on getting to your Gazelle. Next up, as a great extender in Monster Reborn, I played Triple Will of the Salamangreat. You could play this at 2 if you want to. I do like playing it at 3 because of its capabilities of extending greatly. It's pretty much searchable the way you search all of your other traps, and especially when you're going second and need to extend to your hopefully Access Code Talker. Spoiler warning, I don't have it right now, but I have a great compromise for it. So when you need to OTK your opponent, this is pretty easy for that. Next up is the Triple Signet Mining. This is of course a great search card in this deck since it searches pretty much any of your Cyberse monsters. And if you do discard a Salamangreat monster and search Gazelle, you actually can activate Gazelle's effect from your hand and special summon it to that monster that was discarded. Next up I have Triple Pot of Desires. This card is really good in this deck, especially for what I have in the extra deck instead of Access Code Talker. There's not really many pieces in Salamangreats that you would hate to banish. And pieces you probably don't want to banish is Gazelle, Sanctuary, and then probably 2 or more copies of Parallel Exceed. But even if you do banish those, it's not the end of the world at all. Gazelle is probably the worst one to banish, but a lot of the times if I can do this, I won't shotgun the Desires immediately, and I'll use all my one-ofs before doing that. If you don't have a good hand and you do need a shotgun this, then it's fine. It doesn't really hurt you too much. Most of the time you don't banish Gazelle, but it could be sad if you do. Hopefully you draw into a Salamangreat trap card if you do though, because there is a chance of that, and also using Foxy of course. Speaking of Salamangreat traps, we're moving on to them with double Salamangreat Roar. Of course, this card is a searchable negate. A lot of times beginners with this deck won't really know exactly how to search it. The way you do it is by summoning Gazelle, send it to the graveyard, and then make your Sunlight Wolf to bring it back from the graveyard. Most of the time players know that, but just in case you don't, I do feel like it is necessary to have a good guide on how to do that. Then of course there's the Salamangreat Rage. There's 2 effects for this one. Mainly you're going to use the second effect most of the time for a pop 2. If you really need to, you could use the first effect to out certain things, but the majority of the time you're definitely going to be using its second effect. Okay, that was it for the main deck. Now let's get into the extra deck. Of course, starting with your Salamangreat Link monsters, we have the triple Banelinks. This is pretty necessary in Salamangreats, because a lot of the times you do want to keep using your Link 1s after your first turn plays and follow-up plays. And this also just of course helps you grind out a little bit more by protecting your Salamangreat Link monsters. And of course, searches your Sanctuary. Next, I have 3 copies of Sunlight Wolf. Ignore the disgusting common. These 2 are the important ones because they're both ultra rares. Since I'm covering my ugly common, you won't be able to see it, and now you just see the beautiful ultra rares. This one is of course probably one of the best cards in this deck. It keeps on recycling your Salamangreat spell and trap cards from the graveyard, and this is mainly how you are going to search and get all of your traps. It also recycles a fire monster if a monster is summoned in a zone it points to. Hopefully your opponent won't make the mistake of summoning a monster in its zone, but if they do, hey, now you just win more, right? Next up, I have 2 copies of Salamangreat Heatleo. This is, of course, you're probably going to use this more going second than going first. This is some back row hate in the extra deck. It shuffles instead of destroying, which means that they can't trigger their effects or be recycled from the graveyard. If you're having trouble dealing with the monster with lots of attack points, then you could use this card and out that. I wouldn't say that it's 100% necessary in order to play this, but it is a pretty good option to put in your extra deck. I'd say you want to have it more than you won't want to have it, but if you want to do something spicy, maybe take it out and do some testing if you want. Next I have Nightmare Phoenix. This is for the back row hate in the extra deck, and also sometimes I summon this going first. Now why would I do that? Here, so you're summoning your Sunlight Wolf in the extra monster zone, right? Next you summon this card in the zone below it. Since they're code linked, it gives it protection from battle. So now that they both have protection from battle and Sunlight Wolf has protection from card effects with Bailings, it is pretty hard to get over the Sunlight Wolf, which means that you will most likely have this on your following turn. Next there's Splash Mage. Of course this is used to help you get into your OTKs. It's a banish off of Access Code Talker, which again I don't have, but I wish I had it, and that would make this card even better. It makes it easier to get into your update jammer, which I'll show right now. And I'll also show that along with Transcode Talker. Let's move Transcode Talker over here, cover up all the salads. Of course, Update Jammer helps you OTK by using your Link monsters, and Transcode Talker also same thing, helps you Link climb. And for the extra deck piece that I'm using instead of Access Code Talker, it's Topologic Zeroboros. Okay, so this is a Cybers monster, 3000 attack, which means it's pretty strong and beefy. And most of the time, good things come out of this when you use Pot of Desires to combo with it, because then it just gets really beefy to 5000 attack, and that's pretty much the same thing as Access Code Talker, right? Now, it doesn't have all the pops that Access Code Talker does, but it does have something that Access Code Talker doesn't, which is Disruption on your opponent's turn. So you can even summon this on your first turn to give some disruption to your opponent. If you find a way to summon it actually right there where it is, pointing to these extra monster zones, you pretty much lock them out of Link monsters for a little bit. Zeroboros is a good replacement if you are a budget player and you don't have access to Access Code Talker. It's funny that's called Access Code Talker when people don't have access to it, right? Also, another good budget option to use instead of Zeroboros if you don't want to use it is Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avramax. Avramax is a hard monster to out. It gets pretty big, of course, when it attacks. Beat over a lot of stuff. Probably won't OTK like Zeroboros could, but it's also another good option worth considering. Next for our first rank 4s, you probably know these. It's Abyss Dweller. This is the first rank 4. This of course locks your opponent out of the graveyard effects, which means they can't trigger Benten, they can't search if they're playing Virtual World, they can't use their Eldritch cards, they can't use Invocation's graveyard effect. Heck, Shaddolls can't even use any of their graveyard effects when they send them to the graveyard. What are they sending cards from the extra deck to the graveyard for now? It's really good this format, but we also have another option depending on your matchup, of course, because matchups are everything. You want to learn a lot about your matchups. Just another random tip, if you could learn as many decks as possible, that is great, because you want to know how to hit them and what's good against them. Number 41. This of course is everyone's favorite, what is it? It's monster with pillows. Since we're playing mainly Link monsters, this is really good for that. And also, there isn't really a lot of monster effects that we want to use on our opponent's turn. And you can summon this pretty much at the end of your first turn, so that way you make sure that all of your Salamangreat main deck monsters are safe. It's pretty good. Abyss Dweller might be better this format since there's way more graveyard reliance than monster effects on the field. Either way, they're all really great. Now let's go to the side decks. Surprisingly, fairly different from the Thunder Dragon one, which you may or may not have just seen. 2 Gamma Seals. Now I like putting this in Salamangreats generally because sometimes they do have troubles with certain things. Help break your opponent's board when you're going second. This is one of those going second cards especially. They have Winda, Macabre, something like that on the field. Zodiac Trident. This of course, you summon that and get rid of that negate and get rid of those monsters. Helps you out a lot going second. Next, another going second one, Pankratops. I'm not going to explain some of these cards too much because I already explained them in the other video, which you should watch by the way. This one of course, you summon it. It's a 2600 beat stick. Attack maybe once if you want to. Use its pop effect. Continue your plays. Break your opponent's board. Next up, we have the triple Cosmic Cyclones, of course, for back row hate. Banishing is better than destroying. We have the Harpy's Feather Duster. Doesn't banish, but it destroys all of back row format right now. Gotta put in back row hate. Next, of course, more going second cards, evenly matched, 3 of them. Calmly say battle phase. Watch your opponent cry inside. Up next, this is another difference that I have in the side deck. There are currently about 6 cards that are different from the Thunder Dragon one, which that's almost half, 40%. And 40% of the side deck's different, right? So this is Different Dimension Ground. This is mainly a tech for your Zeroboros. Of course, the more banishing, the better. Banish, banish, banish. Boom, summon your big Zeroboros. Of course, Graveyard Reliance is key, this format. You could put this in the main if you want, but I like it in the side mainly because if you don't win the die roll and you go second, this card is practically useless. You do want to see this in your opening hand if you do side it in, that's why it's 3 of. There are still uses for it going second if you just break your opponent's board and they need the Graveyard Reliance again, but it is overall a pretty good card. It has powerful effect. Red Reboot. Back row hate. Of course. Back row, back row, back row. Get out. Get out of here, back row. Imperial Order. This isn't the last change and last card in the side deck. This is mainly because after you're going first turn, when you're playing Salamangreats, you don't really need your spell cards that much anymore. So you activate this and you stop their spell cards. Easy. Drytrons can't use their ritual. Nope. Dogmatica Invoked can't use their invocation or their Deer Servant. Virtual World can't search cards with Foolish Burial or draw with Pot of Desires. And now, that's it. That's the video. I am going to remind you to subscribe again. I believe we improved it by about 1%. It's improving each time, getting better and better. Now why don't we make the ratio 0% to 100%? That's probably impossible. That's probably never going to happen. But let's see if you guys could bring that down a lot though, because it has been getting lower every single video. Like this video, comment, do the stuff. Let me know what you want me to do next, because I am very open to suggestions. Thank you for watching again. Outro time. Goodbye. Have a good day.